What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Emmy Nixon. Today is January 12th, 2022, and we are back for another episode. This is episode 142 now. This is one of our favorites of the entire year that we do. All the Wildcard games, we're previewing all of them, and joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Wayne. What's up?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody out there listening, whenever you may be listening to this. Wild Card weekend, man. It's one of the best weekends every year in sports, but especially now that we get the expanded playoffs with 7 teams. We get 3 wild card games in each conference, 2 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, and then the primetime game on Monday, which I'm sure you're excited for. So we're going to break down all of them. We're going to give you our keys to victory for each team. We're going to break it down from both sides of the ball for each team. And then we're going to make our obvious picks. And then at the end of the episode, we're going to make a Super Bowl pick. Who will be playing in the Super Bowl, and then also who's going to win the Super Bowl. But then obviously in the upcoming weeks, next week we'll probably do a breakdown of the divisional games, if I had to guess. And then the week after will be championship games, and then there will be a week off. And then we'll do the Super Bowl episode, which we like to do every year. So, and that should be fun because last year we incorporated some player props that we did, and I think that really paid off. So you got 4 more weeks of football breakdowns to look forward to, and then once we finish that up, it's going to be right into off-season mode, which is going to be coaching changes and coaching hires and free agency and draft and all that sort of stuff. So while the season may almost be over, although there's still a month of playoffs left, you still have a lot of football content to look forward to on the Raw Prospect Podcast. So just be aware of that. Before we get started, let's just put like a 3-minute bow tie on the college football season before we go full NFL for the next month. I'll just say this. What happened on Monday night was a massacre. I feel bad for TCU, but I also don't feel bad for TCU. It just bottom line is if you're not stacking top 5, top 10 recruiting classes on top of each other year after year after year, like the Georgias, like the Alabamas, like the Ohio States, like the Michigans, it's really hard to win a national championship. And that's just the bottom line. Recruiting and development is part of it for sure, but recruiting is the gateway to national championships today in college football. And the bottom line is Georgia and Kirby Smart, what they're building right now, it's like a 3D replica of what Alabama has been for the past decade to 15 years with Nick Saban. Now, there's still a long way to go for Kirby Smart's program to reach the heights that Alabama, like the sustained success that Alabama has had. And a lot of people are sort of writing off Bama and Nick Saban right now. I wouldn't quite go as far as to do that yet because they're still right up there in the recruiting rankings every year, and they're starting to use the transfer portal more. But right now, with back-to-back championships, there's no question that right now we're living in a world of college football. It's Georgia's world, and we're all just living in it. And we're going to have to live with that.
Yeah, and I really thought that, to go off of your point with recruiting, that the transfer portal was going to start to even things out a little bit more. And we kind of saw that to an extent with the fact that TCU did get to the national championship game, but the difference in talent was evident from start to finish. Georgia was not only the better team, but they looked like they had been tested, and they just go out and lose that game. There was just no scenario where they were going to lose that game. They looked pissed off, and they were just locked in the whole way through. And you got to give them credit, and it's kind of has to do a lot with what Ohio State was able to do against them. I think they got their attention, and what we saw was one of the best college football teams of all time at their very best, and that's really all there is to it.
There are so many conversations that we're going to have regarding college football going into the offseason. This will probably be one of the more active off seasons that we've had since we started the podcast regarding college football. We're going to try to talk a little more recruiting, a little more transfer portal. And, of course, the NFL draft is like our biggest event every off season where we're talking about college players in particular. So that's I'd count that towards college football content as well. So be on the lookout for that. But that's sort of a bow tie on the college football season. And now we can sort of feel good about transitioning for about the next month and a week to full-on NFL playoffs. So here we go. Wildcard weekend.
Yeah, we're going to start off with Seahawks and 49ers. We're going to go in order of the games from the first game played Saturday to obviously Monday night. So first, I'll just go ahead and start with the Seahawks. They're 9.5-point underdogs, and it's pretty obvious why. But the biggest thing for the Seahawks is they're going to live and die by how good Geno Smith plays in this game. He's going to have to make big-time throws under pressure. He's been able to move around in the pocket well this year. He's escaped really well, and his mobility has been a lot better than I'm sure a lot of people thought it would be. But this will be by far his biggest test. And as we've seen the last 2 times they played San Francisco, they're not going to be able to run the football, at least not consistently. And it's going to have to be Geno Smith and these receivers winning in man coverage, because this San Francisco offense is not going to be stopped. So they're going to have to put up points if they want to stay close to this game. That's the bottom line. And I think that's the biggest thing going into this game. San Francisco is going to have to look out for Seattle being extremely aggressive, going forward on 4th downs, trick plays. They're going to pull out all the stops. And Seattle's going to have to control time of possession as well. Keep this San Francisco offense off the field. It's a little bit different from what you think of when you think of San Francisco. You think, oh, San Francisco's strength is their defense. But no, for this game in particular, if you want to beat San Francisco, you have to keep that offense off the field. And then San Francisco side of things, it's really just will Brock Purdy continue to take care of the football and distribute the ball within the offense. I don't see a reason to believe that he won't be able to do that. And I also think San Francisco is going to have their way running the football, so that's going to help a lot as well. The key here is just Brock Purdy's had 7 turnover-worthy plays since he's been the starter, and only 4 of them have turned out to be turnovers, including one against Seattle in that Thursday night football game where Quandre Diggs just dropped one that went straight to him. So will his – I'm not going to say luck. Will that continue? Will that trend of turnover-worthy plays continue to go his way in terms of luck, I guess? And will Seattle be able to take advantage of those defensively? Because those will be the game-changing moments.
This is actually actually, on the surface and on paper, San Francisco, I think, is a far better team. They're a deeper team, and they're expected to win this game, as you can tell by the spread at the bottom of your screen, 9.5. I think earlier in the week it was as high as like 11 or 10. Um, but this game I'm excited to watch. It's always fun to watch divisional rivals meet up for a third time in the postseason. Now, San Francisco did sweep Seattle in the regular season. There have been 23 instances of divisional opponents getting together for a third time in the postseason, and the team that's swept, 23 instances in which they've met, but a team swept them in the regular season. The team that swept them in the regular season, I believe, is 14-9 in the postseason game in those 23 instances. So should be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. Seattle, you can make the argument they deserve to be here. You could also make the argument they don't really deserve to be here. But regardless, they're here. And they had a season that no one really thought they would. And that's because of the play of Geno Smith. And as you mentioned, he's going to have to be brilliant in this game. He's going to have to make big-time throws, and he's got to take care of the ball. But overall, aside from that fact, which is fairly obvious, I mean, to win in the playoffs, you need your quarterback to play good football, especially on the road. Aside from that fact, for me, it's about what does Seattle do, particularly to mitigate this pass rush. Because when I've watched Seattle, when I watched them early on, it seemed like that offensive line was really playing well, and I think they regressed a little bit.
Right.
Latter half of the season. And so for me, from Seattle's perspective, it's about what does that offensive coordinator do, Shane Waldron, do to mitigate this pass rush of the 49ers, which I believe led the league in sacks, and then that led to them being tied for the league lead in interceptions. I mean, they get pressure and they force you into mistakes. And you can't run the football against them. So for me, I think if you're Seattle, you got to use a little more play action than you did during those regular season matchups. You only use play action 13% of the time in those regular season matchups. I think you just got to make that 49ers front seven think a little more. In those regular season games, Seattle was intent on running the football on first and second down, and they weren't really having much success doing so because that 49ers defense is so good, and it's really hard to do that. And so I think for Seattle, you got to mix it up a little bit, maybe not run on first and second down every single time. Use some more play action. If you look at what the Raiders did when they almost beat the 49ers a couple weeks ago, they were doing a lot of that misdirection stuff and play action pass, and I think it really caught the Niners off guard in a way. So I think if you're Shane Waldron, you got to use some misdirection. You can't run it every time into a wall on first and second down. You got to find ways to make this 49ers front seven think a little bit. Because if you're just running on first and second down and then you're in third and longs and you got to throw the ball, well, that Niners defense doesn't really have to think anymore. They can just pin their ears back and get after Geno Smith, which is the worst recipe for trying to win this football game. And on the other hand, it's going to be tough for Seattle because, as you mentioned, against San Francisco in particular, they really struggled to run the football. I have a stat here. This year, San Francisco's defense only surrendered 77 rush yards per game, which ranked first in the NFC, second overall in the NFL. Seattle, by the way, their magic number on the ground has seemed to be 75 rushing yards. In games in which they rushed for 75 or more yards this year, they were 9-3. In games when they didn't reach that mark, they were 0-5. So for me, I mean, that's not saying like if they hit 75 yards rushing in this game, they're definitely going to win. And if they don't, they're definitely going to lose. but it seems to be a critical factor for Seattle. And I think in this particular instance, they're going to have to throw a little more to open up the running game than they did in the first couple matchups where they were more running the football to try to open up the passing game. And then on the other side, I think for Seattle, this is a defense that struggled to stop the run. For much of the season, they allowed 150 rushing yards per game. And in the two matchups against San Francisco, San Francisco averaged about 180 yards on the ground. And in a game that's going to be, I think the forecast calls for a little rain and it's going to be a little muggy, not perfect weather conditions. It's going to be critical that not only is Seattle able to do a better job just corralling San Francisco's running game and making a rookie quarterback throw against what was a very good pass defense. While the run defense wasn't very good, Seattle had one of the better pass defenses in the league, and that was because of Tariq Woolen, the star corner that they got in the draft out of UTSA. Quandre Diggs has really come on as of late at the safety position. I mean, they got some young studs back there Seattle does in the secondary. So that kind of saved them in instances defensively. But not only do you just got to do a better job staying on your assignments, staying in your gaps defensively against this San Francisco running game, but you got to make tackles at the second level in an open field. And the X factor for San Francisco offensively the past couple weeks has been George Kittle. I think he has like 7 touchdowns in the past 4 or 5 games. So it's going to be interesting to see how that Seattle defense, who they match up against George Kittle. Because if you remember, last week, I believe the Niners got Deebo Samuel back from that hamstring injury, whatever it was. And he's another weapon that they just add to this offense. So I think it's going to be tough. It's a tough call. It's going to be a tough ask for Geno Smith to walk into this San Francisco environment and beat this really good San Francisco team. I think the only way San Francisco loses this game is if Brock Purdy does not perform very well and they sort of beat themselves with turnovers and that sort of thing. But I just don't see it from a Kyle Shanahan coach team. I'm gonna pick the Niners to win, and I'm not really sure about the spread, but I think it could be like a 10 to 14 point margin of victory.
Yeah, I think, as you said, the turnover margin is going to be crucial. One thing I would suggest is maybe putting Tariq Woolen on George Kittle, because that seems to be the heart of this offense on the San Francisco side. Obviously, he's not their only weapon. They have plenty of weapons, but Brock Purdy clearly has a uncanny chemistry with George Kittle on a higher level than some of those other guys on that offense. So if I'm Seattle, I first and foremost want to take him out of the game, and then from there, you can work on whatever you got to do with everyone else. Because George Kittle has been an absolute beast these last few weeks, and you don't want to let him beat you if you're Seattle. For me, I'm going to pick the 49ers to win, but I am going to pick Seattle to cover the spread, just because I think it's just going to be a rainy game, just super not loose, but tough-minded, a lot of physical play. I don't think it'll be super high scoring either. I think it'll be in the 28 to 20 range, if I were to guess. I think that's the type of range I see it. So,
yeah, I mean, it could go either way. I think with the weather, it all depends on the conditions. But with that, we'll move on. We're now going to the AFC, where the number 5 seed Los Angeles Chargers face the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think it's 2 first-time quarterbacks making their first playoff starts. big arm quarterbacks. I'll just start with this one. This is one that I've been thinking about for basically the entire week because it's hard to make a call. I think these teams. I think could be one of the better games of the weekend, which is why they put it in the Saturday primetime slot. If you look at Jacksonville back on November 1st, they were sitting at 2-6. And it wasn't looking good. The Titans at that point were running away with the division. But since that point, Jacksonville obviously was able to get it together. And Trevor Lawrence, over the second half of the season, really started to come into his own. They played really good football. They were playing opportunistic on defense. And that's really where I want to start is Jacksonville during the regular season. One of the reasons they were so successful, especially down the stretch, is because they were generating takeaways. That defense, they had 27 takeaways for the year, fourth in the NFL. And not only did they force those takeaways, they came at opportune times. When it was winning time and that defense had to make plays, you think about, I want to remind you of the Week 15 game against the Cowboys where they had that pick six to seal the game. You had last week against the Titans, that strip fumble where that was returned for a touchdown. That basically put that game away. And there were so many other plays that happened for this Jacksonville defense that really helped this team. So I think if you're the Chargers, your first order of business is don't do anything stupid and take care of the ball. Because if you give the Jacksonville defense opportunities, they've proven that they capitalize on those opportunities. And then you get the crowd involved in the game, and this game is in Jacksonville. You just don't want to do that. So turnover margin, I think, could be a big key in this game, as it could in pretty much any playoff game, but particularly in this game, just because of that. The Jacksonville did a great job pressuring the quarterback, 32.9% pressure rate per dropback during the regular season. That was third in the league. So it'll be interesting to see how they match up on the interior, getting pressure on Justin Herbert, especially now, if you remember the 38-10 beatdown that Jacksonville gave the Chargers in Week 3, which seems like forever ago, but I still remember watching that game. Herbert was 10 days removed from a rib injury that he suffered on a Thursday night game against the Chiefs, and Keenan Allen did not play that game. Now Keenan Allen's pretty much fully healthy. He's going to play, and Herbert's also a lot more healthy than he was at that time. So I think just for the fact that the Chargers have rounded into form health-wise, and even though we haven't seen them in a playoff environment yet, and even though Jacksonville has played really well down the stretch, right now I'm erring on the side of the Chargers, particularly because their defense has started to play a little better, especially stopping the run. And I think that Herbert, as spectacular as he is, I think this game will be close. I just think he's going to make the play that he's going to make a couple difference-making plays in this game that you go, wow, that's him. That's the guy. And I think if you're the Chargers, this is a game that you really need to win. I think getting into the playoffs was the first hurdle for Brandon Staley's team. But now I think you need to win. You need to prove that you can at least win a playoff game. It's going to be a close game, but I think I'm going to pick the Chargers. I know you can't really, based on their history, you can't really trust this team. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think since they're healthy now, I'm going to take the Chargers in a close game.
Well, man, I'm right there with you. This one, they're really evenly matched. And it's interesting because Jacksonville's defense is what intrigues me the most about this game. Their pass rush has really come into its own. C.J. Henderson, their corner they drafted out of Clemson, had a really good year this year, a super underrated year as well. And then, of course, you got up front Arden Key, who they picked up from the San Francisco 49ers, and he's been their best defensive player this last month or so. He's been dominant, and if they get him in the game more, who knows what type of impact he could have. He's a budding star in the making, in my opinion. So this Jacksonville team is definitely peaking at the right time, and that really does mean a lot. And then the Chargers side, you can make the argument they are as well, but I didn't like some of the things that they showed against the Broncos. You could probably attribute some of it to just, I don't know, just a division matchup. Those often tend to be um, pretty close games most of the time. But they did seem a little bit sloppy, and offensively all year, it just seems like, particularly in the wide receiver core, this team just lacks speed. That's the biggest thing with the Chargers that I question is the lack of speed on the outside. Their fastest wide receiver is a 4.5, 4.6 guy. You don't really have just a burner that can really stretch a defense. And to me, that's the biggest hole in this offense. They obviously do throw it down the field with Mike Williams, with his jump ball ability, but it's a different type of threat when you have a guy who can strike fear into a defense with the amount of speed that they have, and they don't really have that guy. That's been my biggest criticism of the Chargers roster building all year long, and I think it might hurt them in this game. They're going to be able to get chunk plays, obviously. Like, they're going to put up points, but until they get a speed threat, I think that's when they'll finally be able to fully unleash Justin Herbert's ability to stretch the ball down the field at the highest level. And for that reason, I'm going to pick the Jaguars to pull off the upset here at home. And it's not any fault of Justin Herbert as for why I'm picking them. Like, it's honestly, I'm picking against the Chargers in spite of what Justin Herbert can do. He's the one thing making me question my decision, to be honest. Um, I just think that Jaguars will be able to run the football against this Jaguars defense. And I like some of their matchups on the outside, especially with all the injuries the Chargers have had in the secondary. J.C. Jackson out. Derwin James is banged up most of the season. I mean, it's going to be a close game, and I'm not 100% confident either, but I am going to go with the Jaguars.
It's interesting because I think you can say that on both sides. Both these offenses, you see it at times, half to half, game to game, but the consistency just hasn't been there all year long. And I think on the Jaguars side, I mean, it's a new system. It's, Doug Peterson trying to get his offense implemented. A lot of young players on this Jacksonville team, a young quarterback, that can be understood. But I think it's been the same system for the Chargers. And I guess injuries can also be attributed to this as well. And that's something else that I forgot to mention is that I believe Mike Williams was carted off with an injury in that Jacksonville game. And if he doesn't play, well, then I might be rethinking my decision to pick the Chargers. But I think he's going to give it a go. Jacksonville, they have also been a little bit in a funk offensively, especially for the past couple of weeks against the Jets, who are a really good defense. I'll give you that. They scored just 3 points offensively. And they lead on their defense and special teams in their victories against the Texans and the Titans. So I think, their running game has also been a little bit inconsistent. Etienne is averaging just 55 yards on the ground per game since week 10. I think against the Chargers team that struggled to stop the run all season long, you could see them get the running game going. And if they do, well, then that's going to keep that Chargers offense off the field, and then it's going to make it really tough. I think another place where you could see this game flip is in the red zone. I think both these teams will move the ball, but it's about who scores touchdowns, who capitalizes on opportunities, and who's not able to make plays down the stretch in the red zone. So it's tough. I'm going to take the Chargers just because of Justin Herbert, but I can definitely see where people are coming from when they take the Jags. I think it's one of the more popular upset picks of the week.
Yeah, I didn't get this point off. I was rambling a little bit, but I think the pass rush versus these quarterbacks is going to be what decides this game on both sides. Chargers, they have Joey Bosa back, and of course Khalil Mack, who's I'd say has been a little bit disappointing this year. He's been good in terms of run defense and pressure rate and pass rush win rate, but the sack numbers haven't quite been there up to par with what you'd like to see from Khalil Mack. But if the Chargers want to win this game, Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack are going to have to show up big for them.
All right, so with that, we will move to the Sunday games. First of which being the Dolphins and the Bills. Now this spread is inflated because Tua Tagovailoa will not be playing in this game. But I'll let you start with this one.
Well, it's extremely disappointing, first of all, that Tua won't be able to give it a go. I saw a tweet the other day. I can't quite remember who it was from, but it basically said Tua had memory issues after the Green Bay game, and doctors have told the Dolphins to avoid any conversations that may cause stress to Tua, including when he will play again. So once I saw that, I was thinking, yeah, he's definitely not going to play if that's the case. And about a day after that, it did come out that he won't play. As for the football on the field, it seems like it will be Skylar Thompson. As we know right now, I don't think Teddy will be able to be ready by Sunday, unfortunately. And man, it just really sucks because the Dolphins are one of the teams most well equipped to play the Bills. They run a lot of 21 personnel, and if you guys don't know, that's two back sets. That's a running back. That's two running backs or a running back and a fullback, either one. And they run that about 60% of the time, and the Bills have been awful against 21 personnel all season long, particularly against the run. And Miami was able to run the football at will at Orchard Park in the game they played at the beginning of December. So with Tua in there, this would be a lot different. But without Tua, I just don't see a way for the Dolphins to keep up with this high-powered Bills offense. I just think from a Bills perspective, get out to the lead early. Don't take any chances with anything. Get off to a quick start, and from there, it'll be a relatively stress-free night, in my opinion. I'm going to pick the Bills. I'm not picking them to cover the spread.
Yeah, sorry, Dolphins fans. This isn't really much of a conversation for me. I think the Bills are going to win this game going away. You look at what they did to a familiar divisional foe in last year's Wildcard round with Mac Jones and the Patriots last year, and that was ugly. And that was with Mac Jones in the game. So I think with a rookie quarterback, you're asking a whole lot of a rookie, a late round draft pick out of K-State who had a lot of experience in college, which is good. Had a successful career at K-State. I watched a lot of them, obviously, watching a lot of Big 12 football. But he's just not ready for this. If Miami wants to have any shot, They got to be successful running the ball. In that last matchup in Week 15, when these two teams played in that sort of snow blizzard, if you will, in Buffalo, I remember we broke that game down on this podcast in one of our picks podcasts. The reason the Dolphins kept that game so close was in large part because they rushed for nearly 200 yards on the ground. They were able to control some time of possession. Tua was making smart decisions. And once they hit 188 yards on the ground, 136 of which I should say came from Raheem Mostert, who is now hurt. He suffered an injury in last week's game against the Jets. They're going to have to count on their running game once again to carry this off the offensive load. And I would think the Bills know that, and I think it's just going to be hard to do that. And so I think the Bills will run away with this game. And I'm not mad the Dolphins got in, but I'm also, I would have liked to see another team in this spot. But that's a whole nother story for another day.
Right. One thing I will say is the effect of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, I think, will still be there. Because at the end of the day, with two guys with speed like that, you make one wrong step, and all of a sudden you have the receiver 5 yards past the corner. And we saw it over and over this year. Like a lot of the deep balls, Tua didn't even really put it in front of Waddle or Hill on a lot of those deep balls. Just put it anywhere. They were so wide open. And if Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle can take over this game, then maybe I could see them covering the spread. But I don't know if they will. I wouldn't bet on it. Okay, so let's move on to the next game here. It's going to be the New York Giants at the Minnesota Vikings. I'll start off. I believe these two teams played in week 15 or 14. That game came right down to the wire. I'll start with the Vikings offense. The key to this game is just going to be, can the Vikings get big chunks to Justin Jefferson, KJ Osborne? Because if they're able to do that, then they'll be able to open up other stuff in the passing games, including TJ Hawkinson down the middle of the field. That opens up everything for them, including the running game, of course, with Dalvin Cook. From that point, really, it's just do what you've been doing all year. They've been a high-powered offense for this entire season. You can make the argument they're a one-trick pony, but it's a damn good trick, to be fair. And from a Giants point of view, they were able to send the blitz a lot this season. That was their bread and butter. They blitz, I believe, 40% of the time in most of their games. But in this game in particular, I don't think they'll have to do that, especially with Ingram and Bradbury being out and this Vikings offensive line being a little bit hobbled right now. That makes a huge difference. This Vikings team has been on the correct side of the knife's edge this entire season. And with some of those injuries on that offensive line, it could change things here and there to where they end up on the wrong side of that knife's edge. And it's really going to come down to Dexter Lawrence, first of all, who is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, in my opinion, with how he's played this season. If he's able to take over the game from the interior defensive lineman spot against those backup guards, then that could really change the entire outlook of this game. Because this Giants offense, as good as Daniel Jones has been this year, their bread and butter is running the football. We know that. And they're not the most high-powered offense ever. So this Giants defense is going to have to show up. And I think the number the Giants should shoot for is holding the Vikings under 28. If they can hold them under 28, then I give the Giants a real shot at pulling off the upset here. And I think it's a tough matchup for the Vikings, especially with this offensive line problem.
Yeah, did you know? I just actually learned this just now. This is going to be a first in NFL history. This is the first NFL playoff game in the history of the league where two teams are matching up that both had a negative point differential during the regular season.
Wow.
Now, it's for different reasons on both teams. On the Vikings side, you won 13 games and give them credit for doing that. They're experienced in winning close games. I mean, they've been doing it all season. They proved it time after time after time. So if they're in a close game, it's likely, more likely than not, this year that they're going to win that game. But the reason they have a negative point differential is because they were blown out 3 times. 40-3 loss to the Cowboys, a 24-7 loss to the Eagles, and just a couple weeks ago, a 41-17 loss to the Green Bay Packers. And this is where it gets interesting, right? Because those 3 games had one thing in common, and it was the fact that in those 3 games, Kirk Cousins was an absolute – he was a wreck. I mean, he was a disaster. In those 3 games, those were the only 3 games this year where Kirk Cousins had a quarterback rating below 70. He got sacked 11 times across those 3 games, and he threw a total of 6 interceptions. And so when Kirk Cousins played well, this Giants team was really good. They moved the football. They scored touchdowns. Justin Jefferson is just an absolute witch. He's unstoppable almost at sometimes. So, you know, it's these teams met a couple weeks ago. I believe it was Christmas Eve, where the Giants went toe-to-toe with this Vikings team. And now the Vikings won the game because thanks to a 61-yard field goal from Greg Joseph, I believe is their kicker. But look, I think the Giants, their physicality up front is something that can fluster Kirk Cousins. And if you can fluster Kirk Cousins, we've seen it, you can force him into one of those disaster games. And that's been the recipe for beating the Vikings. The crazy thing about the Vikings is, number one, this year as opposed to past years, and this is a credit to Brian Dable and what he's done with Daniel Jones, but also this offense, even though they have some underachieving weapons, they turned it over the least, I believe, in the NFL. 16 turnovers in 17 games, 10 fumbles and 6 interceptions. That was the second least turnovers in the league. And that was a key coaching point for Brian Dable. Daniel Jones has had turnover issues his previous years in the league, and he really cleaned that up. And so for the Giants, you just got to stick to that recipe. You can't turn the ball over. I don't think this Vikings defense is very good. You can move the football against them. You just don't want to make those mistakes. And that's easier said than done, going on the road in what's going to be a really good environment that we've seen before in Minnesota for a playoff game. But you got to stay with that. But this Giants defense, and I'm very familiar with their new defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale, because he was previously with Baltimore. And I'm very familiar with sort of what he likes to do defensively. And in his time in Baltimore, he was heavy blitz. And he's brought that over, as you mentioned, to the Giants. And it's worked. Now, they don't have the raw sack numbers that you might expect for a team that blitzes as much as they do. But what impresses me is nobody on their team has more than 7.5 sacks. Dexter Lawrence leads them in sacks, I believe, with 7.5. But their 41 sacks are spread out across 19 different players. Which is crazy to me because they're bringing pressure from all over the place. That's what Wink Martindale is known for. And then he mixes it up in the back end where we won't go too deep into the X's and O's, but you guys get the point. So I think the Giants with Kayvon Thibodeau, the games that I've watched, I haven't watched every single Giants game, but he's making plays. Dexter Lawrence, the other guys they have up front, I think with the 2 injuries to the Vikings offensive line, I think that's the matchup to watch. If Kirk Cousins is protected well and he's able to throw the football, get the ball to TJ Hawkinson, get the ball to Justin Jefferson, get the ball to Osborne, and they're able to sort of pass to open up the running game, then the Vikings should win this game. But at the same time, if that Giants defense starts to, I guess, impose their will on a banged up Vikings offensive line, they're able to get to Kirk Cousins. We've seen what that looks like, and I think that could spell disaster for the Minnesota Vikings. This is my one upset of the week. I'm going to pick the Giants to win this game in a close game. It's just a gut feeling, but I like the matchup of the Giants defense against this Minnesota offense.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm picking the Giants also. It's a bit of gut feeling also. I just think the Giants are playing better football right now. They really turned a corner here late in the year with those big win. That big win against the Commanders, I think, is when they really turned a corner offensively and defensively. And I think they can. I think they're going to surprise some people this weekend. I really do. Okay, on to our second to last game here. It's going to be Baltimore at Cincinnati. I'll go first. I've been on the record as someone who's extremely high on Cincinnati, extremely high on Joe Burrow and what they do. But it's worth noting that there have been a lot of injuries for the Cincinnati Bengals team, particularly on that offensive line. It's starting to look more and more like the offensive line we saw last year, particularly in that playoff run. And that's not ideal for the Cincinnati Bengals team. You made all these moves to improve your offensive line. Now Lyle Collins is out for who knows how long. And I believe their center just got injured as well. So that's going to be a storyline to watch throughout this playoff run, is how does that offensive line hold up for the Cincinnati Bengals. Another thing is, from the Ravens side, they're getting healthy at the right time. If, in theory, Lamar Jackson plays. At every other part of their roster, this is as healthy as they've been all year, it feels like. They got back David Ojabo, their second-round pick out of Michigan, who's been an absolute stud. Their defense has really turned a corner, and they've been able to win these tight games, scoring 15, 12, 10 points with Tyler Huntley. And with Lamar Jackson back in there, it would really open things up. My one concern is I just think this Cincinnati Bengals defense is extremely underrated. I think you could make the argument they're the most complete team out of the big three in the AFC, which is them, Buffalo, and Kansas City. That's not to say that they're the best team, but I think if you look at Cincinnati, they have the least amount of weaknesses, particularly on that defensive side of the ball. So with DJ Reader in the middle of that defense, the Ravens are going to be struggling to run the football, and that's their bread and butter. So I'm going to pick Cincinnati to win this game. I think it'll be a close game just simply because the Ravens and what John Harbaugh does as a coach, I think he'll have a game plan prepared to be able to slow down some of the stuff Cincinnati does offensively. But in the end, I think Cincinnati will pull it off.
I agree with you. I think Cincinnati is going to win this game. but it's going to be closer than people think, even if Lamar Jackson doesn't end up playing. At this point, I doubt he plays, but that's just the read that I'm getting from what everyone's saying. He hasn't really practiced at all this week, and it's already Thursday. So this game occurs on Sunday. So I just don't see how that would work out. I think it's going to be either Tyler Huntley with a banged up shoulder or their third string Anthony Brown. Who honestly, for what he's been asked to do, hasn't actually played that bad. And I think it's a good situation because this Baltimore offense, the way it's structured, is a run-first offense. And so you're not, relying on, airing the ball out every time. But I do think the key is a couple injuries to the Cincinnati offensive line, which when we talk about improvement from an offensive line, there was improvement this year from Cincinnati's line. Burrow was sacked 50 plus times last year, got really beat up on their way to the Super Bowl. Remember that divisional game against the Titans where he was sacked, I believe it was 9 or 10 times. But this year, 41 sacks. So it still wasn't great, but there was improvement. And we all know that one of the more underrated aspects of Joe Burrow's game is his pocket awareness and his ability to escape, make plays out of nothing. Something that we really didn't think about when he came into the league. That was one of the things that made them so dangerous last year in those playoffs is Burrow's ability to escape the pocket and make plays off script. I think with Baltimore, the way they like to play defensively, especially on third downs, they're going to test this Bengals offensive line, and Joe Burrow could feel some pressure. And this Baltimore secondary, Baltimore defense in general, has played this Bengals offense a lot better than they did last year. Remember last year, I think the Bengals averaged like 470 yard passing in their two matchups with Baltimore. They were just tearing this defense apart. This year, Burrow hasn't topped 225 yards passing in either game. In fact, he's been below 220. So if you're the Ravens, you're really going to have to continue to step up your performance. If you can hold Burrow to around the marks you've held him to all season long, get some pressure, maybe force a turnover or two, you can hang around in this game for sure. And plus, this is a divisional matchup. So these teams are very familiar with each other. There aren't going to really be a whole lot of surprises on either side. I just think at the end of the day, you picking the better quarterback and the better situation. And I do agree with you. This Cincinnati team, the way they were running the football, not so much the past couple of weeks, but throughout much of their run, like in the middle of the season, the way they were running the football and the way that led to them, their explosive passing game with everyone healthy and this defense rounding into form, I think they were one of the more complete teams down the stretch. They didn't run the football as well as they did the last couple weeks, but I think they'll find a way to get it going, and I think they'll win this game. But I would take the Ravens to cover the spread.
Right, and I feel really confident about the Ravens covering. This is a really big line, and this is AFC North football. Scoring is going to be at a premium. If I were to guess, I think it's going to be around 40 points scored total. So definitely slam the line for the Ravens this week if you're going to be betting. Okay, on to our last game of the night here. It's going to be my Cowboys. Oh my gosh. Autocorrect screwed me with that lower third there. I put Texas Buccaneers, Tampa Bay, but that's besides the point. Ignore that. You all know what I meant. Anyways, I'll start off here. this game is so strange. you look at what the Cowboys have been the last month of the season, it's been shaky. Um, the first part of the year, the defense was fantastic. Everything was really clicking. Obviously, with Cooper Rush in there, he wasn't turning the ball over. He was being smart with football. Um, and things really continued to roll with Dak back in the lineup, and he played well. But the last month, obviously, some of the turnover plays have been not his fault, but some of them have been egregious. Particularly some of the ones against Washington this week. It was, I believe, the worst game I've ever seen Dak play, and that's saying a lot. I've watched a lot of Dak in his career as a Cowboys fan, so um, that's definitely not a good sign. Another thing is the Cowboys averaged, I believe, about 2.5 yards per carry last game against Washington. Zeke averaged less than 1 yard per carry, which is pretty hard to do, to be honest. Um, and man, it just doesn't feel like the same football team. Um, Now for this game in particular, I know I kind of rambled about the Cowboys. That's kind of just fan stuff. Um, this game in particular, it really all comes down to, will Tampa Bay be able to connect down the field with obviously Mike Evans and Chris Godwin? Because those opportunities will be there. The Cowboys play man coverage. They play aggressive style of football. Um, and we saw it in that week one matchup. I believe Tom Brady and Mike Evans connected on I think it was a 50-yard touchdown or something like that. Those opportunities will be there. And Tom Brady has kind of found some things to close out the year. In the Carolina game in particular, he played his best game of the season by far. Um, this past week, maybe not so much, but I think there's reason to believe in what the Bucks are able to do against this Cowboys defense. And man, it's really tough, but I think I'm going to pick the Bucks to win this game.
Whoa.
Yeah, you know, I don't know what exactly is making me feel this way. I think it might just be the Tom Brady effect. But I think the speed that Tampa Bay has on defense, um, particularly that linebacker core, I think that'll cause problems for this Cowboys running game. And if we're not able to run the football, then that's when the offense, you really start to question things. Um, I have faith in Dak. I think he'll have a good game. I think this will be a close game, but I think I will pick the Bucks to make the upset.
Well, there are a couple trends and statistical trends that I think justify you feeling that way, aside from just the on-field eye test the past couple weeks, and you watch, you knowing your team more than me as a Cowboys fan, and knowing the history of I guess not the Buccaneers against the Cowboys. I guess it would be more Tom Brady against the Cowboys. Probably also plays a role in that, and you mentioned that. Look, for one, as you mentioned, Dallas hasn't played a very good brand of football the past month or so. And a lot of that can be attributed to the mistakes that Dak Prescott has made since week 12, when he, I believe, he returned from his injury in week 7. But since week 12, Prescott has thrown 11 interceptions, which is more than any other quarterback in the NFL over that span. Now, I'm going to be honest, I haven't watched every single Cowboys game start to finish over the past 5 or so weeks. So I don't know which interceptions were on him and which weren't, or if there was any, ambiguity in those interceptions at all. But regardless, he's been turnover prone the past month and a half. And if you're turnover prone against Tom Brady, then that's a bad recipe. Um, Now, I really love Dak. I don't want to pick on him, but he's the only quarterback in NFL history to miss the last five or at least 5 games in a season and still lead the league in interceptions. Now, that primarily was because of the past 6 weeks where he threw 11 interceptions over the last 6 or 7 games. So you got to stop doing that. And then obviously Brady never lost to the Cowboys in his career so far. He's 7-0 against the Cowboys. And another thing that I think a lot of people are overlooking, and there's been a lot of I believe there was an article published in the Ringer today about the big, I don't know if it's controversy or arguments going on about playing on grass field as opposed to playing on turf. And CBS Sports, which is a fantastic place to find these sort of weird stats. The Cowboys defense has really struggled when they've played on grass this season as opposed to playing on other surfaces. I believe it's 5 games played on grass, they allow 27 points per game. In the 12 games they did not play on grass, they surrendered just 17 points per game. That's a 10-point difference, and I don't know what that can be attributed to. I think part of it might be it's a little hard to get your footing on grass, and that can affect the pass rush, and that's a big part of what Dallas does defensively. But I don't really know what else could be, attributing to that big of a discrepancy between playing on grass and not playing on grass. But I think I'm not saying that's going to be the end-all, be-all and what decides this game. It's certainly not going to be, but it's something to keep your eye out for sure, as the trends tell you that Dallas doesn't perform its best in these type of environments. But look, CBS Sports is picking, or this guy in particular is picking the upset, Buccaneers over Cowboys 20-17. There's a lot of mixed feelings with how Tampa Bay has sort of seemed to figure it out a little bit offensively the past couple weeks, especially that game against Carolina where they were able to air it out offensively, and the Tom Brady, Mike Evans connection was as good as ever as we've seen it this season by far. I just don't think with a sort of aging receiving core, not a whole lot of speed, this Tampa offensive line, which hasn't been great all season long. And I just don't think – I think if Tampa Bay wants to win this game, they're not only going to have to run the ball more effectively than they have, but I think Tom Brady's going to have to, at times, hold the ball a little longer than he has in the pocket to allow these – I'm not going to say slow receivers, but slower receivers to get down the field and get open. Because when they're open, he can hit them. But that offensive line has got to allow him the time to do that. I believe he was, from snap to release, he had the quickest release time in the league this year. And that was in part due to the bad protection, getting the ball out fast. I think if you're Tom Brady, I don't know if this is your last year or not, but you're going to have to maybe take a couple shots in the pocket, hold on to the ball a little longer, allow your receivers an extra second to get open. Because I don't think with the way Dallas likes to play aggressive defense, if you're just trying to beat them death by 1,000 cuts, I'm not sure that's going to work. So I just think Dallas is the better football team. I think Dak's going to play a lot better than he has the past couple weeks. And I'm going to pick Dallas to win. But I understand where you're coming from. And we'll see what Tampa Bay is. Are they going to be the textbook Buccaneers or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? We'll find out.
Yeah, I will say this. The Tampa Bay offensive line and our defensive line is where we have the biggest edge out of any position group, in my opinion. And Micah Parsons is going to have to play big in this game. Obviously, last year, in his rookie year, he wasn't able to make a huge impact in that 49ers game. And that really made a huge difference in how that game turned out. Um, and if you remember that game, the 49ers really took him out of the game by running it right at him and really making him think about how aggressive he can really be rushing the passer because of how well the 49ers were able to run the football. And whether Tampa Bay will be able to do that is kind of up in the air. But I do think if they just ditch Leonard Fournette already, they could be a much better running football team. They have this kid, Rashad White, who I think is by far the better back, more juice, um, just quicker on his feet, and can cut much better than Leonard Fournette can at this point in his career. I think if they went with the younger guy here, he could cause some problems for the Cowboys.
Yeah, so with that, we're about an hour, 8 minutes in. We finished all the games. And guess what? We want more audience engagement this year on our podcast. So tell us whether you tweet at us at the Raw Prospect Podcast or you leave it in the comments. Who do you think are going to win all these games? And give us your Super Bowl prediction, which is what we will do now. We did our Super Bowl predictions at the beginning of the season. I believe we both had the same thing with the Bills and the Buccaneers, coincidentally, getting in the Super Bowl. For me, now that we're here and the playoffs have arrived, I'm going to stick to my guns, what I've been preaching all season long in the AFC, and that is that Buffalo is going to get to the Super Bowl. I don't really have any rhyme or reason. I know that Josh Allen at times has gotten sloppy. He's reverted to his sloppy tendencies, and Buffalo hasn't been the best defensively since losing Von Miller. But I just have a weird feeling about Buffalo. If they get to an AFC Championship game, which I think is pretty likely, well, a second-round matchup with the Bengals could be interesting. But if they do get to the AFC Championship game, it'll be played. They won't have to go on the road if it's against Kansas City, for that matter. It's kind of a win-win for the Bills in that you're either going to a neutral site to play the Chiefs or you're going to get that game in Buffalo. Because you're the highest seed remaining if Kansas City fizzles out early. I think Josh Allen will do it this year. They'll get to the Super Bowl. And then the NFC, I'm going to have to change my pick from the Buccaneers. And I think I'm going to go with the Niners. Even though they have a rookie at the quarterback position, and it's a risky proposition picking a rookie to get through the playoffs. I think for the first time in a while, when we've seen the Niners in the playoffs, they're about as healthy as they've been in past years. I mean, they're going to have Deebo Samuel. They're going to have George Kittle. You're going to have Elijah Mitchell. You added Christian McCaffrey. You're about as healthy as you've been with those key players going into a postseason as you've ever been. And I think this defense is just that good. So really no rhyme or reason. I think the Eagles will be a tough matchup, especially if they have to go play them in Philly. And certainly the Cowboys would be the other team that I'm watching out for. But I just don't see it from any other teams in the NFC right now. I'm going to go with the Niners and the Bills in the Super Bowl. And I'm going to pick the Bills to win it.
Okay. For me, I'm going to go with the Bills as well. I'm sticking with the Bills. Pretty simple. I think with the DeMar Hamlin situation, with the good news that, has come out of it, given what it looked like at the start. I think that will be a boost for this team. I think it'll sway their way in terms of the impact that that'll have for them emotionally. They're going to go out and play for him, and I think that'll be a big difference in not really motivation, but I think they'll have an extra layer of focus and intention out there on the field. And then the NFC side, I'm changing my pick also, but I'm going to go with the Eagles.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think Jalen Hurts and what this Philly offense has been able to do is underrated still, even after all these weeks of dominance, week over week. I think Jalen Hurts is going to get it done in the playoffs, and really both of the quarterbacks, both Philly and the 49ers have unproven quarterbacks. So it's really just who do you trust more, and then obviously the defensive side of the ball plays a part too, but a lot of times in the playoffs, it comes down to the quarterback position. I'm going to go with the Eagles. Then to win the Super Bowl, I want to pick Buffalo to win it all this year.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's just, what's the word? It's just some things just work out in a way that you're just like, wow. And that's exactly what happened last week with that Bills game against the Patriots. I mean, the first play of football since the DeMar Hamlin incident, the past Monday night, they take a kickoff back all the way for a touchdown. It was just like, wow. I mean, this could turn into one of those magical things where it's just, that's what drives them to their run to the Super Bowl. And I think, as you mentioned, there's going to be, this team was uplifted emotionally with the news that's come out about DeMar Hamlin. That's progressively gotten better and better from the time where they got news that he was awake and they were FaceTiming him in the locker room after, the game, to hours later where he had the breathing tube removed and he was tweeting, active on social media, to now being released from the hospital and being back in Buffalo with the team. I think that's going to uplift them a lot, as you mentioned. And I just think Josh Allen will, I don't know if he'll be like as flawless as he was last postseason, but I just have a weird feeling about it. But that's not to say like it's not going to be easy. You're likely going to have to probably face Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. And if you get through those, I think the team that comes out of the NFC might have a little bit of an easier time getting out of their conference, and that might play a role in like who wins the Super Bowl. But you do get that week off in between, so we'll see what happens. But that's where we stand right now. I think next week we will. I think it'd be fun to do a wild card recap, and then that would lead us into a divisional preview. Because often, in my eyes, even though wild card weekend's fun and there's a lot of crazy stuff that happens, and there are typically like 2 or 3 really good games, I think the divisional matchups really, from a football standpoint, are the best. So I think we'll break those down. But before we do all that, possibly be on the lookout for a basketball episode this weekend as well.
I just got word that I won't be working this weekend, so I think it's likely that there will be a basketball episode. So keep an eye out. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you leave a like on this video. We don't really remind y'all to do that much, but it really does help us out in terms of growing the channel. I'm going to start posting clips on TikTok in the coming weeks. So go follow us on TikTok. It's on the Raw Prospect Podcast, same as it is on YouTube. So make sure to go follow over there.
Yeah, so that's going to put a wrap on one of our favorite episodes every year. But remember, so much more content to come. And I guess, just like Derek Carr's career with the Raiders, as he announced today on his social media, we are going, gone.